Sometimes you can have something wrong with your hand. You might have a diffuse range of kind of odd things going on for you physically that you've noticed, but they may not seem related or don't seem to add up to anything. 70% of women who have polycystic ovarian syndrome, they have it, and it's polycystic ovarian syndrome or PCOS that we're going to spend bit of time talking about now. Dr. Sonia Davison is an endocrinologist from the Jean Hales Foundation. Look, Sonia. Hello. What is polycystic ovarian syndrome and why is having whether you know it or not, a problem? It's a very hot, very common hormonal problem in reproductive age women that can extend after that time. It's essentially a very strangely named syndrome, but it's a hormonal problem where women tend to not ovulate or produce eggs, very ring, and therefore periods can be irregular, or absence, or very erratic. It also is associated, usually, with excess male-type hormones, which we normally make, but they have consequences such as excess facial or body hair growth, acne, oily skin, and in some women's scalp hair loss and the other attractive, collect evening. It's a rotten thing. Because this is usually something that comes about 20s or teenage years. And women do not want to be hairy. And indeed, there's another part of this, they tend to be overweight. But having said that, there's a broad spectrum. Some are very thin and have acne, some are overweight to have a lot of excess hair growth and never have periods. And fertility is a big part of this as well. For those who want to achieve pregnancy. So what causes it? We don't know. If I knew that, I'd be a very famous one of ladies. With their genetic links definitely offer for now. I'll say that the girl's doing with me with her mom, and you can see that mom hesitancy. Well, there are racial links as well. So indigenous women, Asian women, as well as African American women, so there are links there, but we just don't know a particular cause. So do we know how commodities? I mean, if, as I mentioned, lots of women have it are undiagnosed. What do you know about its prevalence? Well, the gist, just to make things even more difficult. There are 3 sets of criteria to diagnose his condition, and various people around the world look at different criteria, but effectively, there was one study of in Australian women of about 750 women. One set of criteria said it was 8%. Another said about 18%, and another set of criteria that about 12%. So I think we can say up to 18%, which is a lot of women, and we are getting bigger as a society. Because we're not moving as much, etc. and women, when they put on weight, can have these syndromes of manifest. Well, recently, I think the guidelines in Australia for diagnosing polycystic ovarian syndrome have been updated. Is that it's not more about the diagnosis, more about the management. So there are various things that we do in recognizing this syndrome, in saying what is normal, and guidance for pays as to what's good for treatment for fertility, and for other things. So, it's more about general gun. This is not an easily diagnosing, but I was going to say, is it? Is it actually with that sort of set of possibilities to these? Women will know, there's something wrong. But thanks, they will go to GPS, and GPS will still get it wrong. And even the ultrasound finding of polycystic ovaries, up to 1/3 of all women can have that. So I have women come with the ultrasound. Oh, I've got polycystic ovaries. Well, you might that you don't have their syndrome. And I've got other women who had the syndrome clearly, but are reasonable. So it's a really poorly. So how do you get a definitive diagnosis? By having 2 out of 3 of those criteria? Excuse me, that we mentioned before. So, it doesn't matter what set of criteria you use. It's 2 out of 3, or some of the criteria you have to have 2 of the sets of that excess hormones, the male type hormones, the acne or excess hair, and the problems with ovulation of the mainstay of this. The polycystic ovaries on the ultrasound doesn't really matter, right? Right now. Sonia, as I understand it. Something that's sort of underlying in this syndrome. I think his insulin resistance, we think, is underpins the whole syndrome. So, that's effectively really it's hard to explain, but having too much insulin, that doesn't work very effectively, and that insulin changes the ovaries from a normal functioning ovary into an ovary that doesn't, and also makes increased male type hormones, which bring about the symptoms, which will bring a lady to sit in my office and have a problem. Well, let's hear a voice memo now, from someone who's had polycystic ovarian syndrome for a few years now. Hi, my name is Samantha and I was diagnosed with PCOS when I was 21. Sounds and thinking, is that I had when I was growing up, was amenorrhea. Irregular, menstrual cycle. Call a little hoop girl Cranfield, and a lot of fatigue. I was quite tired all the time and I still get a lot of abdominal cramps. I was diagnosed by my gynecologist, where I had to have some ultrasounds done and blood test to check hormone levels, managing my PCOS. These days is quite difficult, a lot of PCOS sufferers give out giving chewing-based medication to help manage their weight, but unfortunately, this actually makes me quite sick, so I'm left. Look at my exercise and my diet to see if I can change things that way, try and lose a bit of weight, which is unfortunately quite difficult. Many thanks, Samantha, for providing that voice memo to us. Don't do this on your Davison that link to insulin resistance. What are the health impacts? Does that mean polycystic ovarian syndrome brings? So usually if they do have weight excess, they are therefore at risk for impaired glucose tolerance, or step towards type 2 diabetes. They did. It doesn't mean they're all going to get it, but they definitely are at risk, especially when there is that excess weight and estimate. The said you said. Do you know what? Lifestyle is an extremely important part of management of polycystic ovary syndrome, and either 5 to 10% weight, and if that's 100 kilos for some of these girls are 100 kilos, and struggle with weight. That it's about a 5 to 10 kilo weight loss, which you can do with real, concerted effort that will turn the hormones around for some women and reduce their problems. And also reduce their risk of insulin problems and type 2 diabetes and probably heart disease. When you think of how you want your life to be in old age, should you live so long? So things like getting the care you need and being treated. The kindness. Well, that's a fee way from hell HQ is working in this country at the moment. Last night IBC TV broadcast part 1 of a huge crowd-sourced investigation. We have 4,000 people responded to Four Corners invitation to share their experiences of aged care. Many of the people who responded working the industry hearing Life Matters. Let's continue to talk about all this together. Now someone with personal experiences, some of the difficulties and distress of trying to get good and appropriate aged care is Linda Saltarelli. Linda's the founder of a group called Aged Care Crisis. Linda. Hello. Welcome to Life Matters. Thank you. Now, what prompted you to start this group, Aged Care Crisis? Well, around 15 years ago. My father suffered stroke, and was hospitalized as a result. And we're told that Dad should be moved to a nursing home, and it was then I realized how vulnerable he was. We just found it impossible to find a nursing homes and could cater to his high key needs. And it was then that's when I got involved with I set up Aged Care Crisis, and look, I was at a crisis, but your family. We felt it was at the time, and that's why I named the group Aged Care Crisis, and I think we saw how that played out last night. Look, I would like to acknowledge and thank the countless whistleblowers, both aged care staff and family members, as well as all of the hard work that independent volunteer community-based groups like The Doors. They are like us, and there's several others, that works so hard to shine a much-needed light on what is happening in aged care. Well, what care? Well, Linda, what are the main complaints that people come to you with? The bulk of the complaints that we receive generally around staffing issues. Australia has woefully inadequate numbers of trained staff, by international standards. And because we've been doing this for so long, we have looked overseas, and for example, in the USA, each resident gets double the amount of care from trained nurses, and 1 hour, nursing care each day. It's just impossible to provide good care with that level of care. I mean, the benchmarks our nursing home uses in determining staffing requirements are based on commercial considerations and not research. I mean, these are developed by financial companies that support the providers and lobbies government on their behalf. They are set at levels that make this very poor staffing look legitimate. I mean, sorry, I'm one of the most significant factors in providing quality residential aged care is to ensure that there are sufficiently skilled staff on hand to provide that care. I mean, staff frequently tell us are unable to care for reasons properly. You're given that the conditions in time. Constraints. Yes. Well, we saw that in the Four Corners last night. I mean, one thing that I guess really struck me, Linda was one of the personal care assistants. I think talked about having an average 6 minutes with each resident, each morning to get them up, get them toileted, get them showered, get them dressed, and ready for breakfast. Now, I can't even do that myself in 6 minutes. Let alone get a frail elderly person ready for the day in that time. It's all in our view. And when I watched that part of the program, problems revealed are more symptomatic of a wider structural probleming. I even care that really must be addressed. I mean, decisions are being made not only with our data about care, but by people who have no knowledge of the significance of this. Owners and senior management seem to be largely drawn from the business, finance and managerial sectors who have no clinical care experience. I mean, the concerns are that bodies that report on staffing benchmarks to government industry using this and that as the level of clinical knowledge and engagement on which they are based. Politicians are advised by them. They're accepted as authorities or subject matter experts. They are selected from industry and appointed by government, and not by those in the sector who actually provide the care without experience or data, and are willing to contrary messages coming up from the coalface. Managers and politicians are effectively shielded from the consequences of directions. We should not really be surprised at what's happened. Well, if you have experiences of this kind with aged care, do get in touch. If you're calling through at the moment, we really want to get to your calls as quickly as possible. So as much as we do want to hear stories, and every story has merit, we do ask you, if you can, to try and keep the story fairly to the point, because we have so many people coming through at the moment on our phones here at What Matters. Felicity, I might go to you in Sydney. Now, Felicity, your mother had a reasonably good experience in a retirement village. Tell us about that. Well, other large and Anglican retirement village here. And she lost her language, but she could no longer communicate directly with me. However, I work so I would be, and I thought the nursing home when people didn't expect to see. So, obviously he said your mother was in high gear for 80 years. He went there. Yeah, my mother was similarly, which gear for 10 years. They have that. They're the long story. It's unusual, isn't it, a lot? And I felt that they needed some medication, and what they were responded to explain away with my family, but it was really slow response. Really, like once it's off to that particular